You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. This is Donovan Woods with the Fuels Institute, and I'm happy to be here joined by my co-host.
Hi, I'm Britt with NACS, and I'm excited to join you guys this week.
Thanks for being here, Britt. Now, this week is a little special as we'll talk a little bit about the Fuels Institute's annual meeting, Fuels 2018, and kind of get some insight from some of our speakers. I'm looking forward to hearing what they had to say.
Yeah, so I actually was on site with Donovan, and I think it was 168 people in Chicago just last week, talking about all things fuels, all things vehicles markets, and we were able to sit down with several of our speakers, some panelists, but just experts from across the field. And so we were just going to stitch in a couple of those interviews, and so we were just going to kick it off with Mr. Andy Austin, who is the Senior Vice President of Specialty Products, and kind of see what he has to say about what's happening in the fuels world. So Andy, welcome. What are you hearing from customers that raise some concerns about fuel quality?
I think there's really two issues that we hear from customers. One is really around the changes in the engine technology today and in the changes in the fuel specifications that have occurred over the last 10 years or so, and whether there's a mismatch between that technology and the fuel specs. So certainly that's one area of concern. I think the other one is in the supply chain itself and the way that the supply chain, especially customers and even in their own backyards, manage the storage of fuel, the turnover of fuel, and the quality programs around fuel. So it's really those two areas, I think, that are leading us and our customers to see more fuel-related problems, particularly as it comes to backyard commercial customers.
How can a group like the Fuel Quality Council help address these issues?
Yeah, today in the fuel industry, there really are a lot of different coalitions around fuel. There are refiners, there are engine manufacturers, there are marketers, there are customers who manage fuel in their own backyards. And I think what is very helpful that the Fuel Quality Council is helping to facilitate is bringing together all of these disparate groups with different points of view and helping them to find a way to collaborate around what is a common challenge and need of our end customers that we serve, which is to have a high quality fuel that meets the specifications of today's high pressure common rail Tier 4 engines.
Excellent. Just to kind of wrap up, do you have any final thoughts about the fuels and vehicles markets at large? What are we going to see in the next decade? Anything that you really feel is pressing or a great opportunity for us?
Yeah, I think there's a few major trends that we're obviously going to see. I mean, obviously electric vehicles is going to be important, not just for passenger vehicles, but for commercial trucks. I know we have a lot of customers who are evaluating electric vehicles. They're testing them. Some of the major electric vehicle companies like Tesla and Workhorse and others have electric trucks that they're testing on the roads. I think that, as well as autonomous driving, is going to be huge. I really think our transportation industry is going to be turned upside down over the next 10 to 20 years, and I think that will apply to those of us who provide fuel to that same industry.
Very exciting stuff. Lots of opportunity. Thanks so much for being with us, Andy. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Britt.
Very good, Britt. Very good, very interesting. Now, just for those who don't know, the Fuel Quality Council is hosted and run by the Fuels Institute. And as far as who should be involved, if you want to get involved, please feel free to reach out to John Eichberger or myself. You can go to fuelsinstitute.org, and there's a subtopic there or sub-drop menu for Fuel Quality Council. And as to who should be involved, you're thinking about engine manufacturers, refiners, biofuel producers, additive manufacturers, so really the whole gambit of fuel producers or those who are engaged with the diesel fuel and engine market. So we'd love to have more on board. Again, the more research, the better. The more analysis, the better. And we're looking for solutions. And we don't think there's one true solution that's out there. So we're looking for everyone's input to kind of put the focus on what needs to happen for the consumer.
Awesome. So thanks for that, Donovan. Kind of shifting gears a little bit into a new topic. Octane is kind of big these days. In fact, we're actually going to be hosting a series. I think we're kind of calling it a bit of a road show.
Correct.
Kind of a 4-city event focused specifically on Octane, and it's going to be in July, and we'll be happy to get y'all more information about that. Questions, please go to fuelsinstitute.org. But here's a clip about what Mr. Steve Przemyski has to say about Octane.
What are the opportunities to leverage Octane to improve engine efficiency?
There's a lot of things that an engineer can do to leverage Octane. So people that design engines can take the Octane, they can change the engine design, so future engines can be more efficient. So generally, if you think about all engines built in the last 100 years, higher Octane would allow the engineer to design something called the compression ratio. This is basically how much the fuel and air is squeezed before it's ignited. Generally, higher compression ratio equals higher efficiency. And there's been problems with this in the past. If you know leaded fuel, the reason leaded fuel came about was a cheap way to make high octane, which allowed very efficient engines. In most cases, historically, when we talk about efficiency, we don't necessarily mean miles per gallon, but we do mean the thermodynamic efficiency, which in most cases has been used to make more power out of the engine. So while today's F-150 gets marginally better fuel economy than the previous F-150, it gets tremendously more power, maybe 2 to 3 times as much horsepower. So the engineers have used this octane to make power. With current CAFE rules, there's actually more of a push to say the power is fine. Let's push the efficiency gains to actual miles per gallon. One thing we might want to talk about with high octane, though, is what about the legacy vehicles that are already on the road? Some of those vehicles can take advantage of higher octane, even though they were built prior to the engineer having high octane available. Some of these are like turbocharged engines, very small, downsized, become boosted engines, turbocharged, supercharged engines. If you put higher octane in, modern control systems in certain cases can adapt for this higher octane and use it and run the engine differently. What generally can't take advantage of the higher octane legacy fleet is very old technology. Something with a carburetor on it is a complete waste of time and money. Luckily, there are very few of those on the road. They don't use a lot of fuel. And some of the maybe the mid to early 90s technology or very, very large engines that operate at low speeds, very low, we call them sometimes a granny cycle. A person that never really steps on the gas, they don't really need octane. So in that case, even some of the octane they have at the pump today is really wasted. But in summary, the engineers, if given the octane, could design more efficient engines.
So what are the various issues that the market needs to consider when thinking about introducing a high octane fuel?
So I think the market needs to consider all of the stakeholders because nothing comes for free in this life. The refiners, they would love to produce high octane if they're paid the right price. That price is higher than what they're getting for regular fuel today, which means that price has to be passed on to consumer. So in one way, if you want to push high octane across the board, you're asking all consumers to share the burden and share the cost. As I mentioned previously, some older technology can take advantage, some can't. Generally though, the cost of the high octane for legacy vehicles, old technology, is probably greater than the efficiency gain they get. In other words, they won't see a mile per gallon change large enough to negate this cost. So consumers may be burdened with a little bit extra cost on the fuel. I like how NACS has done a study to try and quantify this cost. I think that's a great step in the right direction. A few cents per gallon doesn't sound like a lot until you average it across all the vehicles on the road. It's actually a significant amount of money. The other thing is the regulators need to get involved. The EPA. Can they regulate octane or not is still somewhat debatable. Will they regulate octane or not is hotly debatable. The fact is most fuel changes in history have been for clear health effects testing, cancer-causing agents, lung irritants. Now we're talking about a greenhouse gas, regulating it and saying the greenhouse gas affects health effects, which is what EPA's charter is. So in summary, you're going to have to get the automakers involved, the consumers, the refiners, the energy companies. Everyone has to get together and decide that this is the right way to go and agree on it.
Not an easy task.
Very difficult.
What other engine technologies show promise to deliver greater internal combustion engine efficiency?
So luckily for us, engine engineers, automotive engineers are very clever people. They spend a lot of time designing things to work around the octane problem because in the auto industry, they still have a goal to get the efficiency. So there are certain technologies you can do mechanically. Some of them are hybrid electric vehicle systems. Everyone knows about a Toyota Prius. This is an engine that operates in a very small, narrow operating range. The electric motor and the batteries are used to keep it in that range while the vehicle operates in a different range. So in other words, the engine is isolated away from the vehicle. Other technologies, Nissan came out with something called a variable compression ratio engine. This is a contraption that changes the compression ratio, and generally lower compression ratio requires less octane, higher compression ratio requires higher octane. So it actually can change this depending on the octane or the conditions that it needs. There are some other technologies for things such as, they call it lean combustion, dilute combustion, compression ignition. These are all ways that you change the combustion regime. In other words, the way the fuel and air is burned. And some of these, they actually prefer low octane. Some prefer high octane. Some prefer diesel-like fuels. Some prefer gasoline fuels. But in general, the engineers will try and use the tools they have, design around, and they'll stretch the limits, but they can't redesign the laws of physics, unfortunately.
Kind of final thoughts or things that we should be paying attention to, looking at the future, anything that you've taken away from today that you think is particularly important for this group of people that we've gathered here?
Yeah, I think the Fuels Institute has done a great job. It's the only group I know of that's gotten together the diverse range of stakeholders that you actually need to get this done. It will not be done by a regulator. It will not be done by an automaker or an energy company. It has to be done by everybody. And people forget how many fueling stations there are. They have a stake in this game too. They actually care what fuel they sell because this is still a business. People need to make money. They need to provide what a consumer wants. The consumer needs to get what they want. The fuel provider needs to actually make a profit to continue operating, continue providing fuel. And the regulator hopefully does the right thing for the intended goal. In this case, it looks like we all have the same goal. We want to reduce the emissions, both criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases, and we want to reduce the fuel consumption. And I think if Fuels Institute continues to work and get everyone together, we actually have a chance to do this in the future.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for your time, Steve. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Britt, that's a great interview. Nice job with Steve there, and I'm really impressed that you got his name right on the first shot. So that's I've known him for a while, but that's still pretty hard every time I see him to think, how do I say this last name?
I'll take that. Thank you.
The thing that was interesting to me on that one is he mentioned refiners, regulators, fuel retailers, automakers, energy companies, and then the key component, consumers. What I still find hard to understand is how they're going to get this message to consumers, why consumers should care.
I think that's a really good point. And I like what he was talking about with just getting everyone together. It's going to be difficult to get all of these stakeholders involved, and I think a consumer is one of those stakeholders. Right. And so it's not just what we're putting into our cars, but it's what we're putting into the world and putting into our bodies, and how much we're consuming and what we're consuming, and trying to be mindful of that. I think it's something that there's so many. If you want to say, there's so many groups and there's so many issues these days of what our impact is and what our footprint is as human beings and as individuals, and we just can't forget about this aspect of it. And what is the right answer? And so what I really appreciate about Fuels, this annual conference, Fuels 2018, was that it did bring as many of those people together, I think, that has ever been brought together. You might have a group of automakers and a group of refiners that do their separate thing, and they're all kind of cheerleading each other, and they kind of have their list of issues. But, it actually is important for the refineries to be mindful of what the people over there are also thinking, and how can we pull our minds together. So I think maybe would it be out of this world to consider having consumers join us at this group, and just try to kind of figure out what their voice might be when it comes to what we want to buy, and how we want to be mobile throughout the world.
Yeah, because change is a scary thing.
And inevitable.
Yeah, and I think consumers, if you're like me, your first thought is, if you're changing something, what's the angle? Why am I being hurt on this? Am I winning on this? I don't know. So I think being honest and open, and also just helping the consumer to understand the benefits that it helps across the board, could be the start of a discussion to see that change happening.
Well said. Well said.
Well, we appreciate you all listening in this week to Fuels Institute and on the Convenience Matters, and talking a little bit about our Fuels 2018 conference, and we hope to hear from you soon again.
Thanks, everyone.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.